My drawings are more conceptual art, you know, conceptual. Like I put it up there and I prayerfully consider the concept I'm trying to illustrate with the blobs and the sticks and it works. You have to hang with it. There's going to be a lot of sections that we need because they're tight in and of themselves. But we're going to have to pay attention and move through the material to really get it. Today we're going to cover Hegel. We're going to cover Marx, and within Marx we're going to cover Feuerbach, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Probably not, but we'll go with that, like my drawings. Just for brief review, remember where we are. In our summary, in your outlines, if everybody's got outlines, you go through the review. What's shifted is our view of ourselves. And Truman's contention, and I think he's right about this, there's a lot of other people circling around this as well. Bud Shuden actually gave me a little note on a documentary from somebody out of Hillsdale that's talking about this stuff, and there's others that are putting their finger on this shift. But what we're seeing is basically at root, this is a conception of ourselves and how we fit into the universe, which is why this is a philosophical discussion. Man is born, man begins to think and reason, and then he starts to ask the big questions. How did I get here? How do I fit in this universe? How did the universe get here? How do I fit into the universe, and do I fit? Do I have a purpose? Do I have meaning? Is there anything that is real? What is real? What's reality? So those are the big philosophical questions that the Bible answers, we know. But a lot of people, when they're starting out and they don't have the scriptures or they don't know the reality underneath all of life, they ask these questions in their mind and they come up with answers. So I think it's a little bit loud, more if you could get it to, yeah, thanks, because I got a bit of feedback. So it starts with us contemplating ourselves, which is why there's a distinction between the historic contemplation of self and the modern contemplation of self. The historic contemplation is that this is a long road going off into the beginning of time. We are in this present moment. These are all the people alive in the world. They're all part of the human race. And what we see when we're born into that is that there's a structure to that. There are people that have come before us. There are people that have come before us. We're going to do our best here with the sound. People that have come before us that have laid the foundation. We say that all the time, right? For the country we live in, or for the laws that we have, or for the rights and privileges we enjoy or don't enjoy. Like all of that came before us. Now we're part of something today that's leading to the... And that's the meta-narrative of this book and of this season that we're in and experiencing. Now, what we're going to be discussing today is the foundation of this whole idea of exploding things. Why is it that everywhere we look, we see attacks in every kind of organization? Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts, churches, governmental structures, school boards in some neighborhood somewhere that nobody's ever heard of. Why is it that every single organization or gathering of people where there's 3 or 4 people, there's something in the middle that's trying to explode? Where does that come from? And that's what we're focused on today. That's what we're focused on today. So with that intro, I'll go ahead and get us started here. Oh, one other piece of our intro. Remember, we're existing in what we've coined under Charles Taylor. Truman has brought forward this idea of a social imaginary, meaning we all live here in Charlotte, North Carolina, but we don't look beyond Charlotte, North Carolina very much in our day-to-day. As a matter of fact, we don't look much beyond our neighborhoods. And we have our little pathways, we have the things that we do. We hold in our head the fact that we've got 2 people running for president. We've never met them. We've never been in the same room with them, most of us. Never will we. We hold in our head we're part of the United States government and that those laws flow down to all of us. But most mostly we don't encounter those laws unless we get pulled over for a speeding ticket or whatever. But they form the basis of how we think and feel about a lot of things. Now remember, we talked about the sexual revolution and how different it was with the advent of the pill, how different it was when no-fault divorce came in. All of a sudden, how we actually thought about divorce was different. How we thought about premarital relations was different. All of these things started to shift, but it wasn't because somebody passed a law or somebody preached it or somebody whatever. There was all of these different components. There was medical breakthroughs, there was laws changed, there were cultural things that shifted in magazines and articles, etc. But all of these things kind of form this collective understanding of how we are and how the country is and what's okay to do and what's not okay to do in our culture. And it forms the basis of our intuitions. That's the link between these dusty old philosophers that hardly anybody's ever heard of and how we actually live today. Because the distillation of these dusty old philosophers, you really only get a couple of key phrases. But it's that distillation that becomes part of the fabric that we hold in our head, that forms our intuitions. And we're going to see that social imaginary that we're holding in our heads. Now, in your outline, you've got romantic roots right here. We said it's Descartes. I think, therefore I am. That's one of those pithy. It's man that determines what's real and what isn't, because I'm thinking. Therefore I am. Therefore what I hear, what I feel, what I can touch, what I can taste, that's what's real. That's fine. Feelings are central to who we are. That was Rousseau. So if I am the ground of reality and I feel a certain way about certain things, then that's reality too. Now the problem is in steps 3 and 4. Society pressures and corrupts who we are. So with steps 1 and 2, you can be in your living room. You can be in the closet all by yourself, grounding your own reality, feeling your own feelings. But at some point, you have to walk out your front door and interact with other people who may think the same thing. That they're the ground of reality. Their feelings are the things that take dominance. And then you get 1,000 people together, all of them think they're the ground of reality. All of them think that their feelings are the ground of reality, and that's a problem. And that's where the things start to break down. That's where it starts to become an issue. And then finally, in the Romantic era, there's this return to nature. That's the cure. We just have to return to nature. But there's an inherent problem with that. From the standpoint of my feelings, or I'm the ground of reality, my feelings are determinative. Because if I'm going to nature to get trued up to my true self, that means that nature is dictating to me how and what I should be, which is an external standard, which violates 1 and 2 in our summary. Do you see that? So we're going to see that now in our book. Let's go ahead and start with our chapter. The name of this chapter is Prometheus Unbound. And the idea of Prometheus, if you don't remember, he was a titan. In the Greek panoply of gods, etc. It was Prometheus that took fire and gave it to man, which started the whole ball rolling. Because all of a sudden, man could make fire, man could do all these things, etc., and just went, and the gods actually punished Prometheus for giving man this gift of fire, because then all of a sudden it couldn't be stopped. So that's really where he's going here. So we're going to read our introduction a little bit. Let's see. Okay. Spencer. Oh, there we go, Aiden. If you'll stand up and read for us. Just read that. Let's read that first paragraph on 51. Actually, that whole paragraph, 51.
So the whole page 51?
Yes, please.
If one of the elements of the modern self, the significant authority that we now give to our inner feelings with regard to our identity, has precedent in the work of Rousseau and the Romantics, it is still clear that the story cannot stop there. The modern self is not simply one that sees inner feelings as authoritative. The modern self also largely rejects the idea that human nature has any intrinsic moral structure or significance.
So pause there. So now we're going on to the next chapter. Remember, what we're doing is there was a social imaginary prior to Descartes. And the social imaginary was largely the historic imaginary, that we fit into this universe, and it was our job and the job of all the institutions and everything else to influence us and help us to take our place in history at that time. That started to change. Now we're going to the next chapter of this deconstructing of the traditional social imaginary, this idea that we have a place. Go ahead.
While we accept that there is a biological phenomenon that we might call human nature, something that means that we cannot, for example, reproduce with lizards or chimpanzees, we tend not to draw any great moral implications from this. To assert, therefore, that human beings, by their very nature, should not engage in certain sexual practices is something unlikely to meet with popular affirmation today. The idea that merely being a human carries an intrinsic morality and moral purpose is seen as a fiction, and often regarded as one confected in order to justify the exploitation of one group by another.
Very good. So what we see here is two key points. In the modern self, which is here, this stage of history, back here is where we're taking responsibility coming from what? Morals. So you're making the same mistake that all the modern people do today. No, just kidding. It's because we have reason. Yes, Rhonda's going like this. You've got intelligence. You've got the ability. A 2-year-old does not have this ability. You have the ability to foresee the consequences of a 2-year-old with a knife in their hands. And so we would say that that adult has a moral responsibility to protect those other children from themselves because we have the ability to reason through that. Do you see how that flows through to a moral standard where we would say that adult is worthy of blame for not protecting those children? But the reason why we're saying they're worthy of blame is because that's the only person in the room that knew to do it. Had the reasoning capacity, had the experience, had the physical ability to dominate that child, take that little life away. All of those abilities gave this higher being in the room the responsibility morally to exercise the superior physical gifts, the superior reasoning gifts, the superior experience, and all of that to take that knife away from that child. Now that seems like a very simplistic example, but remember that example as we flow through this discussion. Because what Marx would argue, Karl Marx, is that there is no moral responsibility there. And Nietzsche. And if you remember, Rousseau had 7 children, I think, and he gave them all away for adoption immediately. Because he felt like he had no moral responsibility to those children. Yes, quickly.
Just saying that you can't divorce reason from conscience, because if it was just reason, there is no moral responsibility.
If it was just reason, there is no moral responsibility. And that's the question, yes. And that's where we're headed. Because it really has consequences when you divorce the two. So let's go ahead to Hegel. Page 52 in your books. Hegel posits a theory. So Hegel precedes Marx, and he's an influence in Marx. Hegel has a key statement. He said in 52, human self-consciousness, i.e. how human beings think about themselves and the world around them, changes over time. Now, conceptually, what he's saying is, okay, this is a picture of the purpose and meaning of a man's life. But that's only for today. 100 years from now, it could be a different picture, like we have now. And 100 years from now, it could be another big picture, like we have later on. So the purpose, the meaning, all that stuff, the structure of it changes, was Hegel's idea. Let's go ahead and read that on 52. The last paragraph. Jesse, do you have your book? All right, go ahead and read 52. I want you to read the bottom of the this bottom paragraph, this makes intuitive sense. Just go ahead and read that down.
This makes intuitive sense. If we reflect on our own, the manner in which we respond to others is intimately connected to the other people with whom we interact. Our self-consciousness is shaped by the way in which it engages with the self-consciousness of others, and vice versa. These interactions are dynamic and have an effect on us, thus we change over time. While I still have the same fingerprints I had as a child, I am in a sense quite a different person from the one who emerges from my mother's womb. And that raises the question of what exactly are we to understand by human nature?
Perfect. So pause there. So the essence of that, so you read through that paragraph, that makes sense, right? I love the analogy. I've got the same fingerprints now as you know, a man in my age versus when I was born as a little kiddo. They're just bigger. But yeah, but I've grown a lot. What that is that's maturity. So you've grown, and this is the idea, you've grown in your maturity and your ability to take on this role, but the role itself hasn't changed. That's the distinction. But what Hegel is saying is, well, as you grow up and mature, your ultimate purpose changes. What we would say is, as you grow up and mature, your ability to fulfill your ultimate purpose stays the same, but you just get better at it. Does that make sense? It's a key distinction because Marx is about to step in and blow the whole thing apart. But I just wanted us to have that distinction. All right, so the big question is this, and it's in the middle of 53. Neil, can you read that nice and loud for us? And where I want you to pick up is in 53, it's right here. It says, the real question of human nature. I'll stop you.
The real question of human nature goes beyond basic biology. It really demands that we address questions of, say, morality and purpose. Does human nature carry with it a moral structure and a specific end or purpose that remain constant over time and to which we must conform ourselves in order to flourish? Or are we simply the stuff of which we are made and beyond that, free to be or do whatever we so choose? Pieces of living Play-Doh attached to a will.
That's perfect, right there. Do you see the question? Where we're moving, this is post-enlightenment, is what if there is no God? And what if all there is matter, physical stuff, what he calls Play-Doh? And in a sense, that's what we do with the materials of the earth, right? We dig earth out of the ground in different elements, and we make them into car batteries, or we make them into tanks, or we make them into whatever, or we grow stuff out of the ground in food, and then we take that food and we make it into tacos, or we make it into whatever. We take base level materials and we make it into stuff. What if we're stuff? And what if all of life is nothing but the manipulation of matter for a season while you are alive, whatever that means, and then you die and then you go back to being dirt? What if that's reality? If that's reality, then there is no moral. We can reason and see that in our head, but there is no morality, because morality is a question of what is right and what is wrong. But in order to say that's right, that's wrong, somebody has to have the authority to say that's right and that's wrong. So if Allison makes a beautiful vase, for those of you that don't know Allison, she's a potter. She makes these things incredible. It's wonderful. But if she makes this vase out of clay, which is basically dirt and some chemicals, and she hardens it and it's lovely, who has the right to decide what to do with that vase? Allison does. Why?
She made it.
She made it. What if Allison decides to dump it off a cliff and just psh? Hers to do. What if she decides to sell it at the artisan's market? Hers to do. What's the basis of her authority?
She made it.
Her creatorhood. She is the creator of that vase? What's the basis of my authority to look at Allison and say, no, you may not do that? What's the basis of my authority to do that? I'm taller. Well, in a sense, we've had that argument too, haven't we? Might makes right. I have no innate authority to tell a creator of an object what to do with that object. Not in and of myself. Or to call that object right, or to call it wrong. Does that make sense? So what you have to get your mind around before we jump into Marx, who's next, and this is really hard to do. Picture that adult in a room with little 2-year-olds running around. One of them has a knife, and the adult looks at that and says, I have no moral responsibility to do anything here. And the only way you can get there is to picture a life without God, with all things being nothing but matter, and there's no meaning, and there's no right and wrong. Because it's all just matter. That's all it is. So that's the mindset we have to carry into where this is going. Because Marx is about to redefine human beings and how they relate to each other. Because if there is no God, if there is no morality, if there is no meaning, we have these reasoning animals that are growing up, interacting with each other, animals meaning us, that are growing up and interacting with each other, but how are they relating to one another? How do you define that? If there is no God, they're not made in the image of God, God doesn't exist, there's no right, there's no wrong. How do you put your arms around that? That's where we're headed next with Marx. So page 54. Page 54. Bob Cunningham, could I get you to read, please? At the top of page 54. So now we're going to define Marx. We're going to define Karl Marx. Now, when you hear Marx, I don't want you to hear communism. Hear Marxism. Marx is a philosopher. Communism, in its various iterations, and there's various iterations. China practices a brand, Russia practices a brand. Russia's brand of communism has shifted over time, so is China's. There's other, socialistic is a blend. Whatever it is, leave off the governmental structure, which is an outflow of this kind of philosophical thinking. Hang with me in Marx as a philosopher whose thoughts are still impacting world culture, world thought. So Marx the philosopher, okay? But first we have to define his beliefs. Go ahead, Bob.
Hegel is what we call an idealist, and interested in the intellectual spirit of the age, i.e. the ideas that gave it its distinctive shape. Marx is a materialist, and that is in a twofold sense. He believes that the world is all that there is, that there is no transcendent realm, no God or gods behind this material universe that might provide a sacred foundation for any moral order. But Marx's materialism goes further. He believes that the material conditions of life, specifically the economic relations that exist between people, decisively shape how we think of reality. In short, it is those economic relations that have the most profound impact upon our self-consciousness and our identity. This also means that how we think about reality changes over time because economic relations change. One implication of this understanding of human identity and relationships is that all forms of human community become political. Everything from the village sports teams, trade unions, draws its ultimate significance from the role it plays in the economic and thus political nature of society.
Perfect. Thank you. Did you guys catch those two key shifts? You have human beings that are nothing more than reasoning matter. There is no morality. There is no right or wrong. Still live in community with one another. Why? So his answer is, economic advantage. If we're a village, I can have farmers. I can have bread makers that take what farmers produce and make bread. I can buy the bread, and I'm a blacksmith, so I can do this and we can do that. And so we're all living together as a community. There is no right and wrong. There is no purpose or meaning. But we're feeding ourselves. We're giving ourselves water to drink. We're protecting ourselves with an army. We're doing all these things. But we're all in relation to one another economically. That's what holds us together. And then the political side of it is this. So if Mike, as a farmer, decides he's not going to grow grain this year, and I'm in the same village as Mike, do I have the right to go to Mike and say, you have the responsibility to grow grain economically? Yes, I do. Which is a political move. Because all of a sudden I'm arguing from the stomachs of all of us around us, you have a role to play in the economic environment of this community that we live in, and we're depending on you, comrade, for your contribution to the collective whole. Without Mike's grain, the bread maker has no bread to make. If the bread maker has no bread to make, he can't sell that, which means that that's a breakdown in the hunger cycle, etc. So all of this stuff starts to fall apart in the sense that everybody's dependent on everybody else. Do you start to hear the forms of communism and socialism coming out there? But it's dependent on there being no inherent morality, only economic value of one to another. Does that make sense? Now, we can get into some of the nuances. What if Mike is now too old to hoe the field? He is. Thank you very much. Or he's had a knee surgery and all of a sudden he can't do what he used to do.
He's got soil and grain.
Does Mike have a right to exist as a reasoning animal?
No.
He does not.
This is sounding like Animal Farm.
What's that?
This is sounding like Animal Farm.
You're skipping ahead. We're going to get there. We got to go through alienation, and we got to go. Yeah. Anyway, she's right. Animal Farm. But what's important is we recognize that without God, He has no right or claim on society to exist. Not really. What about an infant born that can't take care of itself? Does the infant born, does the society have a reason to support the infant born?
Yes, future economic output.
What's that?
Yes, future economic output.
Yes, future economic output. We need a bench. We need people that are going to come up and take their place and be that bench. Remember, we're still in place. We're just trying to figure out, at this point, we haven't blown it out yet. That's later. But we're still trying to figure out, how do these thinking, reasoning animals still exist in a society? What does this mean? So it's economics, is his argument, which also means it's political. So when you talk about an economic argument, what you're talking about is basically how much money are you worth to me? Or how much food can you give me? Or how much water or protection? It's like, I need you for this, you need me for that. We depend on each other economically. When it gets political is how do we divvy it up? So politics is not governmental structure. Politics is the managing of a finite amount of resources for the benefit of everyone. Politics is the managing of a finite amount of resources for the benefit of everyone. So if the government oversees a country like the United States or USSR, old one, or China, or what have you, you've got all these people in place that are producing all these different things, they're doing all these different things, and these resources are happening. But you've got some bad actors over here that are killing people. Well, you can't kill people. They're economic units, and so you have to punish those people because they're harming the economy. They're harming the overall whole. Or these people want to come in and steal our crops, so we have to send our soldiers that way to protect the economic livelihoods and the lives of everyone within our country. And then the political side as well is it's the governance. So if we have a total output of grain that we all get to eat, who decides how much each of us get to eat? The government. It's a political decision. How do we divvy up the resources that we all have? Does that make sense? So economic interrelation automatically leads to political decisions. Who gets what, and what do they get of the existing? Yes?
Real quick.
Yes.
Marx's framework starts to sound cohesive until you remember that his entire framework starts with a moral law that survival is good.
Yes.
Right?
There's a couple of those in here, which we're going to get to. So does everybody have the framework right now? No God, reasoning animals. We're all in a political environment. How do we divvy it up? That's the quick summary. So let's keep pushing forward.
Can you clarify that shift again from the relationship? So if we're talking about a shift in relationships, so the relationships between individuals has shifted from one way of importance to a new way. From, am I hearing you right to say it was previously a moral relationships were more, you learn morality, you learn, and now it's shifted to just thinking it on an economic.
Yes.
Okay.
This is Marx's contention.
Okay.
And recognize, too, that Marx gave these opinions in the mid-1800s and then died and never saw any benefit or any kind of adoption coming from his ideas. It wasn't until later that this flowed through, which it did big time. All right. So we've covered Marx as a materialist. Marx believes men live in alienation. So I'm going to skip through this a little bit. Marx recognizes that there is this sense of disjointedness that human beings have. And it's what we know is there's God up here. We know that we are living in disobedience to God. We need God. And there's this angst between us that where we stifle that. We don't recognize that. But Marx has to explain it from an economic standpoint because there is no God. So what Marx does is he says, oh, this isn't sin, this isn't that. No, what it is it's alienation. In other words, if you're a furniture maker and you're part of a process that creates furniture, but you don't have enough money to buy the furniture that you make, you're alienated from the fruit of your labors. You've been distanced and you can't access what somebody else has. They have the fruits of your labor, not you. And that's a sense of alienation. Does that make sense? That's what he identifies as the angst of all men. They have this alienation, the fruit of their labors. So let's go on to status quo, because this is where it gets really important for today. The status quo, it just means the current state of things. So if you were to talk about the United States, the current state of things is we have something called the president. We have two other branches of government. We have the judicial and the legislative. And that's the way we exist. And if you go to Great Britain, it's a different status quo. They've got a different governmental structure. And there's people that live this way and that way. We have rights and this, that, and the other. It's the current day situation. But what Marx is doing is he's looking at the current situation at the time in the 1800s and he's saying, all of this has to go. Because the status quo and everything about it that is what is keeping men under oppression. All of these organizations, all of these groups, etc., are part of the status quo that's keeping man in bondage. And so that needs to be exploded. So let's go ahead and skip to that part. Under Marx believes the status quo must be destroyed. And we're going to skip through the rest of that. The question is, how does he believe that? So let's go to, there's a lot of material. Truman brings forward Marx's critique of religion. Let's go ahead and go there. Mike Cassell, do you have your book? If you could please read page 55 to 56. There's a quote at the bottom of 55, religion. And then to the top of 56. Now, this is a philosopher that was, so Marx has a problem. Marx thinks there is no God. He's just reasoned that through. And yet men still cling to this myth called religion, even though there is no God. How can that be? How can that be? And this was a philosopher that had this quote that answered that question for him, he thinks. Go ahead.
Religion, at least the Christian, is the relation of man to himself, or more correctly to his own nature, i.e. his subjective nature, but a relation of it viewed as a nature apart from his own. The divine being is nothing else than a human being, or rather the human nature purified, free from the limits of the individual man, made objective, i.e. contemplated and revered as another, distinct being. All the attributes of the divine nature are therefore attributes of the human nature.
Perfect. And I'll go on. Feuerbach is saying here that religious talk about God, the talk that a believer thinks of as referring to God as an objective being, is really just talk about humanity in its ideal version. But a humanity nonetheless, projected onto an idea that has no real existence. So this is starting to feed into what Nietzsche would call the Superman concept. The hyperman, the man that's unfettered in his own entity, in his own relations. So Marx looks at this and goes, oh, that's what this is. That's what religion is. And then Marx has a very distinctive opinion of religion. Very distinctive. Rachel, do you have your book? Can you read it for us? Do you have a book? Nope. Well, why don't you go ahead and read it then? Just stand up. We've got a quote by Marx at the bottom of 57, the foundation of irreligious criticism. Oops, twice I did that.
The foundation of irreligious criticism.
Sorry, this is Marx. So Marx has to deal with religion. He goes straight at it in order to eliminate it. And we're going to cover that in a minute. Go ahead, sorry.
The foundation of irreligious criticism is man makes religion. Religion does not make man. Religion is indeed the self-consciousness, the self-esteem of man who has either not yet won to himself or has already lost himself again. The struggle against religion is therefore indirectly the struggle against that world whose spiritual aroma is religion. Religious suffering is at one and the same time the expression of real suffering and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of the heartless world, and the soul of the soulless condition. It is the opium of the people. The abolition of religion is the illusionary happiness of the people, is the demand for their real happiness.
Perfect, thank you. Notice at the end, their real happiness, their fulfillment, their self-actualization, whatever phrase you want to stick in there. One of the barriers is religion. So Marx attacks this. Now, and I skipped this, maybe I shouldn't have, but the idea of religion is an economic one. He wants to attack this because his view of religion is this. Marx's religious morality is really an expression of the concerns of the dominant class. In the case of the 19th century Europe, this was the bourgeoisie, the factory owners, the merchants, the middle class. So this is how he sees religion being utilized for economics, economic oppression. Take, for example, Christianity's teaching taught from several pulpits over the years. Husbands and wives should be faithful to each other, shouldn't drink too much, should work hard, honestly, for their masters or employers. A Christian might see these as imperatives because of the will of God. And by this means, the will of God and the means by which human beings made in his image can flourish. Marx, however, would see such a belief as mystical nonsense. For him, these imperatives are the means by which the middle-class employers make sure that their workers are the kind of people who make up a stable, sober, obedient workforce. So it's religion that keeps people in their economic station. Religion is the supporter of the status quo. Now, what's different about Marx, and this is and all of those that follow him, Marx says philosophers of the past have just been documenters of what they see around them. They're basically describing what they see. What Marx says is that that's not good enough. It's not good enough to just describe what we see. We have to, the purpose of philosophy is to change what we see. It has to change. And so when Marx says that religion is the opium of the people, what he's saying is it's the anesthetic. It's what allows people to stay in their repressed economic environments under the thumb of this bourgeoisie, this small minority that holds all the cards. They have to stay under that thumb, but it's religion that keeps them there, and that's what makes them feel good about it. It's like anesthesia. And he says you remove the anesthesia, you remove religion, all of a sudden the people wake up to their pain and to their repression, and they revolt. And then they get rid of the status quo, the higher group. Yes?
I thought an interesting example of this is how slave owners originally kind of tried to introduce Christianity and focus on the bits where it says, be obedient, follow your masters. But a lot of slaves ended up going and fixating on Moses freeing the slaves and all this. I thought that was interesting on how it can turn that kind of idea around.
You're absolutely right. And we've had the scriptures. We know this. The scriptures get used for all kinds of purposes, agendas. All kinds of them. So the key pieces here, though, are Marx's turn towards philosophy is not meant to just describe, it's meant to change. It's meant to change the status quo, what is. Now, there's a very interesting quote that we need to get to here, and you brought up Animal Farm, which is perfect. The flow of Marx, and this is what I want you guys to see, is he recognizes there is usually a small class of people that are ruling a much larger class of people in economic relations. And you see that everywhere. So call this a governmental structure, call it a merchant class structure, whatever it may be, there's a group that's ruling over the large group while the larger group goes about its day. This is the status quo. And what he is calling for is the people in this larger group to overthrow the people in this smaller group so that the people in the larger group can have the fruits of their labors, the economic value of their labors, their full fulfillment, their happiness. And then he catalogs this in Carl Trueman is using religion as a particular example of this. One of the ways that the status quo is maintained, that the people like us are anesthetized to the pain of our plight, is religion. It's the opium that keeps us numb to the angst, the alienation that we have, so these can stay in charge and we stay down here. That's one of the ways. So let's read the fulfillment of this. Nathan, do you have your book? You do not, or you don't? Chris McAllister, do you? Is one magically appearing? There it is. One magically appeared. Perfect.
I do, Jason. Yes.
Good job. Yes. By the way, this is a church. Don't believe in magic. Go ahead. If you'll stand up, please, and read. At the bottom of 58, all the way down here, there's a paragraph. We should also notice in closing that Marx's claim, etc., and then go all the way through here and stop right before Friedrich Nietzsche.
We should also notice in closing that Marx's claim that all human social relations are economic relations has one more significant result. All human social relations must therefore be political because they all serve the status quo. Whether we are talking about Boy Scouts or the local golf club, in Marx's world, all have political significance. If society itself is to be transformed, then these two must be arenas of political combat. That probably sounds very familiar in a world where the last decade has seen cake making, flower
Perfect. So thank you. What Marx is saying then, so this is the picture. You've got the ruling class over this society or whatever it is. Now, if we take this and instead of looking at it from the side, we come over the top of it, now what we see in that paragraph is this. So you've got a ruling class at the center of things, but underneath that ruling class are all of these societal structures of different sizes, shapes, etc. But all of these societal structures are supporting this one group of bourgeoisie right in the middle, the ruling class. So if you picture like a couple people on a life raft with a bunch of balloons all around them in the water, etc., but the people are balancing on that, this is one of the things that's causing the status quo. It's religion. We've got to get rid of it. Boy Scouts, that's supporting the status quo. We've got to get rid of it. A democratic or Republican government structure supporting the status quo. We've got to get rid of it. Police, got to get rid of it. All of these structures, anytime you've got people gathered together in a societal interaction with an economic base and a political background where you're divvying up the results of it, but then you've got a group on top that's ruling over it all, that's the status quo, which means that everything has to be attacked and removed because it's the opium that's keeping you from doing what you need to do. Yes, Mary?
Why can't a cake baker get the fruits of his labors?
Why can't the what?
Cake baker receive fruits from his labors without being attacked.
Why can't? So her question is, why can't the cake baker receive the fruits of their labors without being attacked? Politics. Well, the cake baker, right, economic relationships, gets the grain from Mike, she bakes the cake, that goes out and it serves the stomachs of the people. It's the economic relations. If she's divorced from her ability to do what she does, then she's been alienated. That's the economic and the political. Now, the question that Mary's asking is, how does this relate to the status quo? I believe is what you're asking. That's a structure. That's a structure. So the cake baker is part of this larger structure. But because we have a ruling class, and whatever village it is, because we have a ruling class, that means that we have the oppressed and the oppressors. And however that village is structured, whatever the economic relationships are in that village, etc., that keep some people above other people, that's causing the alienation. That's what needs to be exploded. Now, see, hold on there, Mr. Bloom. The last piece of this, and this is why I want you to get Marxism versus communism versus socialism versus whatever. This philosophy has no end. It's circular. And this is where Animal Farm comes in. How many people have read Animal Farm or are familiar with it? Perfect. See, there's a reason why we read these books in school, folks. This is awesome. Well, keep finding ways to read them. So Animal Farm, written by George Orwell in the 40s, and what it is these animals on the farm are part of the oppressed, right? And then you've got the farmer and his family. They're the oppressors. As they overthrow the farmer and his family, the animals rise up. They start wearing human clothes. They're ruling the roost, and they start running the farm just like mom and dad, just like the farmers did. And so then those animals need to rise up and overthrow those animals. And then those animals would need to rise up and overthrow those animals. And then, you see where it's going? There is no end to Marxian philosophy. It is a circle. Because there will always end up being people here that are administrating or making those decisions, etc., which means there's always people in the wider frame that are there to be oppressed. It is the story of Animal Farm. Now, what we have, though, in the world is we have governmental structures that stop the circular process. That's why you want to divorce communistic Russia, communistic China, communistic whatever from Marxism, which is this ever-rolling whatever. Because what happens is the next group got in charge in Russia and they said, stop! We got guns, we got missiles, we got this, we got that. We're good, you're bad, that's too bad. And now we're a country. Now we all call each other comrade, but we get steak, you get nothing. And we've seen that over and over, haven't we? So don't mistake a governmental structure in whatever state it's in, whether it's currently new, whether it's midway through its cycle, whether it's reached the end of its cycle, whether it's renewing its cycle, whatever it is, don't mistake that for the philosophy of Marx, which is a constant cycle of uprising and attacking, which is why we do have Girl Scout, Boy Scout problems, we've got police problems, we've got governmental problems, we've got everything that you could possibly think of is part of the status quo, and none of it can be left alone because all of it has to be reshaped and attacked. Does that make sense as a larger concept? That's Marxism. From then on, philosophers like Marx are out to change the world, not to describe the world. And that is a huge shift because philosophers were never out to change the world. They were always out to describe the world. Yes, Tim?
Just to use a common term heard today, referred to as critical theory.
Mm-hmm.
And critical theory based on whatever subject, critical race, critical obesity, et cetera, where critical means to tear it down.
Right.
Throw it away. The word theory means to come up with a new idea.
Yeah. It's the cycle. It's the circular cycle.
Jason?
Yes.
The difference is, yes, the old Marxism was based on an economic and class struggle, but cultural Marxism is what we're experiencing because economic Marxism could not take root in America because of our middle class, upper mobility, free enterprise system. So what they, through the Berlin School and critical race theory, what they are doing now is saying we have to shift and we have to re-tribalize America. We have to take what was a melting pot, separate the people into factions against each other in order to tear down the structure. But it has to be a cultural system, not so much an economic system.
Yes. So what Neil is saying is taking us basically to today, but where I'm going to keep us on purpose is in the 1800s with Marx and the key ideas that he posited that led to today. Because right now we're still in the 1800s, and we're still in, the question we answer today is why is it that we keep experiencing this whole movement towards deconstructing? Why is it that everything keeps getting attacked? And the philosophical roots for that are in Karl Marx and others, but primarily Karl Marx. And we'll study the next flow as we go into Nietzsche next week. And I'll leave it there. Pastor, can you close us in prayer?
Our Lord and our King, know you are the sovereign one who's ruling over the likes of the influence of a guy named Marx. And yet it's good to have basis upon which we have categories that we can assess world philosophies. The fact that there is a God who's our ultimate authority and we are subject to you. I pray, Lord, that these lessons for us will, yes, give insights, understanding, but also give us greater confidence in our understanding of Christ and the view of our Savior. And so bless this lesson and the future ones and past ones.